Hello, and welcome to another episode of That Made Your List, a weekly podcast where an average, ordinary film fan, that's me, interviews other average, ordinary film fans. My name is Dave Goodger, and joining me on the podcast this week, we have Luca Hope-Fallon. Hello, Luca.
Hello. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on. Okay, before we get started with the same 20 questions everybody else gets, why don't you tell myself and the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a film student living in Kent in the south of England, which I suppose two Brits on the show. I think we're taking over the internet at this point. I'm a student at Kent University in just finishing up my first year. I've been a film fanatic for probably about the last sort of 10 years or so. My dad was a TV producer and a music videos director who really wanted to be a film director. Yeah. So got introduced to a lot of things through him, Hitchcock, Kubrick, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Since then, did a couple of years studying theatre and then realised that film was more what I wanted to do. I suppose besides that, I'm now a musical theatre performer and director as well, with amateur dramatics companies.
Oh, wow.
I guess that's about it.
Oh, that's superb. More than enough. Okay, fantastic. What sort of stuff are you directing then on there? Is it?
So it's at the moment it's mostly showcase directing individual numbers for like big variety productions that my theatre society will put on. Okay. Sorry. A bit of a cough. Next week I'm pitching to direct a production of Rent.
Oh, wow.
Which will be on in February of next year.
Superb. Cool.
So that'll be fun if that ends up happening.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Okay, we'll crack on with the questions then. Starting up at the top as we always do. It's one of the ones that a lot of people tend to put the most thought out into. What is your favourite film?
Yeah, so I used to have like a very standard answer to give to this, which was the answer that I said for about 2 years. But since then, very, very recently, I rewatched an old favourite that then became my current favourite film, which is Robin Hardy's 1973 horror movie called The Wicker Man.
Oh, yes. Good film.
Which I saw for the first time when I was about 14. Oddly, it came as a free DVD in a copy of The Times, which is a British broadsheet newspaper. And I remember putting it in the DVD player and just being completely transfixed by it. It's got a younger Christopher Lee and a younger Edward Woodward in it. Yep. Probably the best performances that either of them have ever done. Yes. It's about Edward Woodward. He's a very staunch, very Christian police officer from Scotland who goes to investigate the disappearance of a young girl in this island community and slowly finds out that there's something very wrong with this missing girl and that it's all wrapped up in this kind of strange pagan community. And he gets essentially in way over his head trying to figure out what happened. Yeah. And I just think it's beautiful, it's atmospheric, it's got a really profound connection to, I think, the way questions about like the imposition of new values on old communities and sort of encroaching on culture and stuff like that. And just explores that really beautifully. And I watched it again a few weeks ago and just realized that, I think this is my favorite film ever. It's absolutely stunning.
No, absolutely. With Christopher Lee on there, I mean, I have seen the film. It was a long time ago that I saw the film now. And he appeared in the film for free. he didn't take a wage for it.
Yeah, no, he absolutely. He said that it was his favorite role he ever did. Yes. And he was one of the film was originally released as a B-side for Nicholas Roeg, like a double in a double feature, a B picture.
Yeah.
With a showing of Nick Roeg's film Don't Look Now, which is another one of my favorite films ever.
Yes.
Just absolutely great film with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. Yeah. And it originally was released very, very, very cut down, with a lot of the scenes taken out, particularly a lot of the scenes involving music. But Christopher Lee really campaigned very passionately for the full film to be released, and it's essentially because of him and Hardy that we have the film as complete as we can have it now,
Yes.
which is great, because it's an hour and a half of absolutely stunning cinema as far as I'm concerned.
No, absolutely. It was, as I say, Christopher Lee has gone on record as saying this was his favourite role. So much so as when the press tours, he was going wherever they wanted him. He was turning up in the middle of America on PBS in America, doing a 2-minute breakfast interview about it, and then clearing off back again. He was all over the world doing it. With a funny thing on this one, though, although it's set in Scotland and the character's meant to be Scottish, none of the lead actors were Scots. You've got Australian, Swedish, 2 Brits.
Yeah, well, Woodward and Lee are English, and then Brit Eklund is Swedish. She's being dubbed because her Swedish accent was... There's a funny story that Brit Eklund tells about that film. She's one of the main stars of the film, but she's barely in it because she's dubbed. And in this incredibly beautiful scene where she's trying to tempt Edward Woodward's police sergeant, she tells this story about how she's dancing naked, and Brit Eklund in this interview says, and they replaced me with a big butted body double, because they wanted someone with a larger posterior for that temptation scene.
She was pregnant at the time when filming. She was a few months pregnant. Yeah, so she didn't mind being shown nude top half, but the bottom half with the bump and everything she didn't want to do. So yeah, for the full nude scene, it was someone else. I can't remember who it was now. Anyway,
no, I forget who the body double is.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. What's your opinion on the remake?
I thought that you were going to ask that. I really like Neil LaBute's films in general. I like In the Company of Men and Nurse Betty and Lakeview Terrace. Yeah. But his films are always very, very weird, and it's difficult to find things to say about them. That film is dire. It's really dreadful. It's not hard to find things to say about that movie. It's fun at parts, but like the most famous and well remembered scene of that film, the bees scene, is not in the theatrical version.
Yeah.
It's Nicolas Cage as your Edward Woodward, and who is it? It's
I can't remember.
She plays the mother from The Exorcist. Oh my god, I'm completely blanking on her name.
Ellen Burstyn.
Ellen Burstyn, thank you. Sorry, Ellen.
No.
As Christopher Lee and Edward Woodward is a bizarre casting choice. Yeah. And the weird, like, woman-dominated island thing I just found to be kind of uncomfortable and strange. And just a matter of sort of a question of, like, why did you make this film, Neil?
I think it's quite easily said it's Nicolas Cage playing Edward Woodward's role. He is full Cage with it.
It's very, very Cage, and obviously they make him American because they weren't going to make him do a Scottish accent. It's an island.
Quite amusing, actually.
It's an undiscovered, pagan, untouched island off the coast of America.
Yeah,
which is bizarre. And it's bees and honey as opposed to apples. It's very strange.
Yeah, no. Robin Hardy, he only did 3 films, directed 3 films. Obviously, he died couple of years ago, but one of them was The Wicker Tree. The Wicker Tree,
yes, 2011.
Now,
which
I saw that. Is it a sort of a sequel, or is it sort of in the
same? It's like considered to be like a companion piece,
right?
Like it is actually set in America. It's set in Texas, and there's a village, and some Texan Christians are sent to Glasgow to a village, and it's a weird one.
Oh.
In that one, they're specifically going on a mission. It pales in comparison. To say the least.
Okay. That's a good start. Okay, right, we'll move on then, because I say I've not seen the other one. I've literally just seen it as I was looking through what Robin Hardy had done. I was like, okay. Right, so, second one, what's the last film that you watched?
Yeah, so this is the one that, when you asked me to send off the questions, I was like, well, I watched quite a few films. Yeah. So depending on when it went back, it might have changed. So the last film I watched, I'm going to go with the last film I watched for the first time. is a film by Agnes Varda, who is a French film director, very sort of prominent in the art house, still works today, has been working since the 1950s. A film from the 1980s called Vagabond, which stars Sandrine Bonnaire and Masha Merrill and Yolande Moreau. And it's very much a part of French art house cinema. And it's a story about a woman who is... the corpse of a woman is discovered frozen to death. And it's almost like a vignette-based... we use the term mockumentary, but I don't actually mean mockumentary because it's not a comedy.
Yes.
But it's a fake documentary.
Right.
About sort of interviewing all of these people who have known this woman called Mona, who is the dead woman. She's basically a wanderer, and she's wandering across one winter, sort of on the road of France, and how she gets into the state where she eventually dies of the frost.
Right.
And I had to watch it for a film class on the art house, and I found it to be slow and plodding, and there was something sort of very, very human and very hypnotic about it. The way that it sort of played around with editing techniques and pacing, and it really does feel like a journey in and of itself.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. Varda's a fantastic filmmaker. I think she made a documentary either last year or the year before called Faces Places.
Okay.
Which is absolutely wonderful. And she made Claire de Saint-Cassette, which is a really important sort of Nouvelle Vague film, and La Pointe Courte and stuff and such like that. But Vagabond is one of her later works, and it is a really, really great film. It's somewhat impenetrable, but
right.
Very sort of worth it, I think.
Oh, superb. Is it sort of like, is it a kind of a whodanity type thing? Are you trying to find out how she died, or is it just
it's not really life? That. It's kind of it's essentially there's a police investigation of her body that happens very early in the film, and it's just like she died of natural causes.
Oh, okay.
It's more like, how do we get here, and what kind of person is so dedicated to that sort of wanderlust that they die for it?
Yes.
Right. And also, like, how do they interact with people who don't live that kind of lives, and sort of whose responsibility is it, and that kind of... It's not a whoddunit, but, like, you know, could other people have done differently, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Superb. Okay. Okay. You're not surprised. I've not seen it.
I hadn't until it was on a syllabus, so...
No. Okay. Fantastic. Right, we'll move on then. What's your favourite action-adventure film?
Yeah, so I took a very loose definition of this, because there was a particular film that I really wanted to talk about. I went with an animated movie that I think has enough action and enough adventure to count.
Okay.
Which is a Studio Ghibli film, 1997's Princess Mononoke.
Okay.
Which it's just one of my favourite movies ever. It's my favourite animated film of all time. When we get to my favourite animated film, we'll actually be talking about my second favourite animated film of all time.
Okay.
It's the story of a prince from a tribe who kills a demon in the shape of a boar, and contracts a curse from the demon, and is then sent out of his tribe and into the world to try and find a cure. Because the tribe mystic, it's set in sort of medieval Japan.
Yeah.
The tribe mystic basically says that your body will corrupt, you will become full of this curse, and you will die. So we cast you out to find what you can.
Yeah.
Good luck, but so long.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to this town called Iron Town, where it's an ironworking city. Where there's a conflict going on between the city and the spirits of the forest, and trapped in the middle of that are the prince, who is called Ashitaka, and the wolf girl, who is the titular Princess Mononoke. Her name is San, but Mononoke, I think, means something like forest spirit or something similar to that. So there's this sort of conflict going on at the same time as I suppose a question of industry versus nature. Miyazaki's movies at the best of times have these very environmental themes to them. And I think the thing that impresses me so much about it is, first of all, it's absolutely beautiful. The animation is gorgeous. Miyazaki's films always are. Just the landscapes and the designs of all of these spirits, and the fluidity of the motion, and it's just gorgeous in every way. It makes you really feel for the beauty of nature, which I think is what Miyazaki's trying to do in many ways.
Yeah.
And also, I think that it's got just such the thematic element, the environmental message. It's very easy to make a film about environmentalism and make it overblown or very on the nose. Think of things like Fern Gully and Avatar, and even like stuff like Pocahontas, which is also about colonialism, but also about the environment. I think that a film that can sort of not subtly, it's certainly not subtle, but be very tactful and make it about the story first.
Yes.
Is really a beautiful thing, and I think Miyazaki is incredible at doing that. I love the characters, I love the central conflict, I love the music by Joe Hisaishi, who's a guy who composes with Miyazaki on basically all his movies, is as spectacular as ever. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think it's the best film that Ghibli has ever made. I think it's the best film that Miyazaki's ever made, and it's just one of my favorite films of all time.
No, superb. I've not seen this one. I've seen a couple of Kurosawas. I've seen Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle. Yeah, those two. I've heard of Mononoke, but I've not actually seen it, so it's on the list to be ticking down there. But
I love Spirited Away a lot, and Howl's Moving Castle is a very beautiful movie. I don't have as much of a personal attachment to it.
Yeah.
But I love Spirited Away. I love Kiki's Delivery Service, which is a much quieter, more sort of slice of life type film.
Right.
Miyazaki has those. He has things like My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service and The Wind Rises, which are very quiet, just about people's lives, and then he has the big sweeping epics like Spirited Away and Laputa and Howl and Princess Mononoke. I think that he's a fantastic filmmaker. He's very interested in technology, specifically aeroplane technology. He's got a big thing for flying.
Yeah.
But he's also very interested in nature and the environment, and women protagonists as well. I think is something that he's very interested in putting.
Yeah, quite a few of his are,
especially his more adventure and action type films, which I think is a really interesting and often very well executed thing in his films.
Yeah.
His women are very well written and very sympathetic, and just excellent characters. I think he is one of my favourite filmmakers, all things considered.
Superb. I say it's obviously it's incredibly successful in Japan. There, it did replace E.T. as the highest grossing film in Japan until Titanic came out, and Titanic just swept the board, as it has done pretty much everywhere it went.
Won Best Picture at the Japanese Academy Awards as well.
Did it? Wow.
Yeah. I believe it's still the only animated picture to have done so.
Oh, superb. Okay, we'll move on. We'll keeping the genres, as it were. What's your favourite horror?
People who know me, people who have spent any extended period of time talking to me online will know that horror cinema is my real love. Yep. So this was, though I basically live by lists and have a big long list of my favourite films of all time. Choosing my favourite horror movie was really difficult. I thought about choosing Alien. I thought about choosing David Cronenberg's The Brood. For a brief moment, I thought about choosing Son of Frankenstein, which is the Universal monster movie.
Yeah.
What I settled on was an Italian film by a director called Dario Argento. Yes. Which is Suspiria, which is a story about a ballet dancer who goes to... she's an American ballet dancer, and she goes to a ballet academy in Germany. And people start to... the plot is not that important. People basically start to die left, right, and center from weird happenings. And she finds out that the school may have some connection to this witch who who's been dead for centuries, and that might have something to do with the goings-on. But the film is not really about the story. The film is about the cinematography and the music and the mood, which are all just stunning. It's I believe it's one of the last films to have been shot in Technicolor,
Right.
and it uses Technicolor to just the most incredible extent. Its color is absolutely beautiful, and I think it's when people think of sort of atmospheric horror cinema, they tend to think of either black and white or very, very muted colors, like very dark, can't see much, or it's all in black and white. But Suspiria is an incredibly colorful film. There are pinks and blues. The blood is almost looks like candy cotton color. There's huge sweeping stained glass windows and green lights and red lights and just incredible shots, and everyone is so sort of beautifully made up. And it just makes everything so fairy tale-like. It reminds me of a fairy tale in many ways. Okay. It reminds me of something like, from a visual perspective, it reminds me of like the 1930s Snow White, or like an Alice in Wonderland or something like that, where there's so much contrast between like the black and the color, or the darkness and the light. Sort of a lot of like chiaroscuro lighting techniques, and very, very violent. Lots of blood, lots of graphic death. Lots of beautiful atmospheric. Well, not beautiful is really the wrong word. Just like horrifying atmospheric music by Claudio Simonetti and his band Goblin, who scores a lot of Argento's films. They're basically like a prog rock band, who also do film scores. I think that Argento is one of the unsung masters of horror. When people think about Wes Craven and Tobe Hooper and sort of people like that, John Carpenter as well, obviously. Yes. I think Argento is another one that really fits in with that. And the Italian filmmakers in general, people like Fulci and Bava and Sergio Martino, were making all of these brilliant sort of subversive and usually very, very sleazy films in the 70s. But Argento took a much more occult and precise tone to it. And I think he came out with just a fantastic piece of cinema.
Yeah, superb. Again, there's another one. This got remade. Was it?
It is being remade. The remake hasn't been released yet with Dakota Johnson and Tilda Swinton. Yeah. The remake actually looks.
Shot remake, by the look of
it. No, not at all.
Right.
The remake to me looks very, very good. Okay. I think that from what I've seen from the trailer, it's being scored by Tom York of Radiohead fame, who is a musician that I have a lot of admiration for. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be taking a mix of visual inspirations from Suspiria, and like there's some elements of The Shining in what I've seen in the trailer. It looks fantastic. It's not as colorful as the original film. It's being made by Luca Guadagnino, who is he directed Call Me by Your Name.
Right, okay.
Which came out last year.
Yes.
Very, very different project to be. So I was curious, but the trailer has. It looks great. I have been told to be skeptical of
Right. You're just to let you know, your audio's gone real quiet again. It's I'm not quite sure what's happened there. I mean, I can hear you just about. Oh, that sounds a bit better.
About that?
Yeah, that's better. You're back. We're back. There we go.
How long have I been quiet for?
Oh, literally just the tail end of that sentence before I stopped you.
Tilda Swinton. I am very, very excited for the remake. It looks different enough that I'm very excited to see what they do with it.
Yeah. Okay. That's brilliant. Okay. Again, jumping genres again. One that's a little bit more broad with it. But what's your favourite drama?
Yeah, it's obviously a very, very broad one. I went with another Japanese film by basically the godfather of Japanese cinema, at least in how we view it in the West.
Yep.
Akira Kurosawa. I went with Rashomon, which is his 1950 film.
Yep.
About the death of a samurai, and the various perspectives on his death. One of them comes from a bandit, one of them comes from his wife, one of them comes from a woodcutter, and the other one comes from the spirit of the samurai possessing a medium. And it's a film that is about sort of how perspective can influence how we see events, and how truth is maybe an unrealistic ideal to aspire to, and how we'll never really know what is true and untrue about things, because everyone who's there has a different perspective. For example, the bandit story is very much about himself and how gallant and how forceful he is, whereas the wife's is very much about betrayal and sort of her own feelings about her own uncleanliness, essentially. Right. And all of these different perspectives, which may be drawn from the same event and may be truthful in the heads of the people telling them, are sort of resulting in these widely varied stories, which I think is a very, very interesting thing to look at.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting and sort of very, very thought-provoking film.
Yeah.
And especially the ending, which I don't want to spoil. It's not a big like plot event.
Yeah.
But it's a small thing that I think is kind of the perfect capstone. It's got a lot of Kurosawa regulars. Toshiro Mifune is the bandit, and he plays Kikuchiyo in Seven Samurai and the titular bodyguard in Yojimbo. The cinematography is done by Kazuya Miyagawa, who worked with Kurosawa a lot, and it is as beautiful as Kurosawa's films always are.
Yeah.
He's got an incredible way of shooting motion and light in black and white cinema that I just find to be really, really stunning.
No, absolutely. It's a conversation I had last episode with Paul Oyama.
Yes.
I imagine he'd be listening to this with a smile on his face, knowing he's someone else in there with the Kurosawa love. It's
yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised at all that Paul was talking. Oh yeah, he mentioned Ran.
Yes.
Which is a much, much later film.
Yes.
It might be his last, though I'm not sure about that. No, he was making films into the 90s, so it was not quite his last, but certainly towards the tail end of his career. Yeah. Whereas Rashomon is, I guess, one of the first ones that really certainly crossed over. Yes.
Okay, that's fantastic. We'll move on. Then we'll do another jump again, and we'll go. What's your favourite comedy?
Beetlejuice.
Oh, yes.
I love Beetlejuice so much. This is good though, because I've spent quite a while, I think, talking about maybe films that are slightly more on the art house side of things. It's always nice to talk about something that's a little bit more
mainstream,
and also like what you see is what you get.
Yes.
I think that I'm not a huge Tim Burton fan.
Yep.
Anymore. I think that he's made some really excellent films. I love Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I very much like the first Batman. I like Edward Scissorhands, and I like Ed Wood. I like Big Fish. But I think the tipping point for me was Sweeney Todd, which I didn't enjoy, and then after that everything has been kind of. Although I like Frankenweenie a lot.
Frankenweenie's cool. I love that film. But
Beetlejuice, there's not much to say about it. Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis play a married couple who then die, and as spirits, their new house is invaded by the Dietz family, which are played by Catherine O'Hara, Jeffrey Jones, and Winona Ryder. Yep. Love of my life, Winona Ryder. And they are an obnoxious and frustrating rich family who want to renovate this house into something that its old owners never wanted it to be. So they try and call on the help of the spiritual world and come across Michael Keaton in what I think is maybe the best performance he's ever given. Yes. Still. And one of my favorite, like, comedic anti-heroes, Beetlejuice himself.
who is just brilliant. I think that it's a combination of Baldwin and Davis, Keaton, Winona Ryder, and the really beautiful stop motion animated segments, animation work in this film that make it so great.
Yeah.
I saw it for the first time when I was very young, sort of maybe 6 or 7. So it's very possible that this was really instrumental in getting me into sort of spooky cinema.
Yes.
Because it's got sort of spooky elements like the dinner party and the snake and all of those things. And
it was originally designed to be a straight up horror.
Yeah.
Beetlejuice was intended to be a winged demon that transformed into this Middle Eastern, I think, character that in human form.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a completely different film to what we've ended up with.
Absolutely. I mean, Burton made Beetlejuice after Pee-wee, and Pee-wee did very, very well, and Burton wanted to kind of take the success of Pee-wee and do something that was more him, and I think because he was a young director, and I think that because he was sort of first getting this taste of freedom, he was sort of trying to find his feet. And I think that Beetlejuice is to me the most Burton of all Burton movies, because it's got the sort of the interest in the occult, and also the sort of the very cheeky sense of humor, and the kind of the slightly sneering look at suburban life, and particularly rich suburban life, which he takes forward in things like Dark Shadows, which it doesn't do as well.
Yeah.
But it's a very Burton movie.
Definitely.
And I think that Keaton is so fantastic, and I think that the married couple, the ghost couple, the Maitlands, are just really lovely and genuine and sweet. I love Gina Davis; she's great. I really like her in like League of Their Own and such.
Yes.
Thelma and Louise, The Fly, which we might be talking about a bit later. And Alec Baldwin is obviously fantastic in it too. It's a really funny, really sort of sincere and very sweet movie that I think is you see most of. I think it's the best example of Burton just being very, very passionate about what he's doing.
Yes.
And it really shows. There's so much love in that movie, and so much sort of joy.
No, absolutely. I mean, Keaton himself, it's probably his second most recognisable after obviously the Batman suit is such a symbol on its own, but his role in there, I mean, his from Mr. Mom to Beetlejuice,
yeah,
to
absolutely,
Batman, in the space of what, 5 years, 6
yeah,
years?
Mr. Mom was
Mr. Mom was
83, and then Beetlejuice was 88, and Batman was 89. Yeah. So it's like a 6-year, like a 6-year thread
to go from that to that, and then still even now having a career where he's jumping backwards and forwards from to genre all the way through. He really has proved himself as an actor in there and being able to do the different sorts.
Yeah, Keaton always comes across to me as an actor who's like very aware of his career and how his career has gone. I think that we've seen that a lot with stuff like Birdman and the Vulture. In Spider-Man, he's very aware that he comes from he's viewed in a very particular way.
Yes.
Birdman seems almost autobiographical. I'm not the first person to have said that by any stretch.
No.
But I think that there's a lot of it in the Vulture as well, where he's kind of trying to sort of play with that expectation.
Yes.
I remember at one point I heard someone say that he would have made a great Joker later in his life, which I think that makes sense to me.
Yes.
He's great. He's a very sort of smart actor, I think.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I saw a video of his that went viral when he got an honorary degree from somewhere, and he finished his speech. He walked away from the podium and come back and says, "Oh yeah, don't forget, I'm Batman." And he walked off again. I mean, even now he knows. Yeah, you're right. He knows where he's come from, and he knows exactly why he's got the career that he's got now. Still, so no, fantastic. With this, I mean, it's I think the studio wanted to call the film House Ghosts or something similar. So Burton turned around and, as a joke, and said, "Oh no, why don't we call it Scared Sheetless?" And the studio almost went with it. They loved it. And he only said it as a joke. He was horrified at the fact that his film might almost be called that. No, brilliant. Another one this is Keaton's favourite film of his own.
Do you know who it was originally going to be?
Oh, I was told this a while. I've forgotten now. Who was?
It's absolutely insane. Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh my god! Yeah, that's.
Burton wanted Sammy Davis Jr. to do it, but David Geffen was like, "No, you should probably go with Keaton."
Yeah.
I think that Keaton's the right choice, but I would have loved to have seen Sammy in that role.
Yeah, something completely different. That's for sure. Okay, right. We'll jump out of the genres for a little bit now, though. Name a film that makes you happy.
This was probably the easiest one on the whole list, because when I want to watch a film for the purposes of like lifting my mood, or cheering me up, or making me feel good, the one that I always turn to is 1964 Disney, Julie Andrews, Dick Van Dyke, Mary Poppins. Just one of certainly my favorite live action Disney movie ever. I think that Mary Poppins is one of the greatest characters in cinema.
Yep.
I love Dick Van Dyke. David Tomlinson is unbelievable in this film, as Mr. Banks, the father.
Yes.
He's incredible. He's in a lot of Disney live action films. He's in Bedknobs and Broomsticks and The Love Bug.
I forgot he was in that one.
Yeah, no, he plays the villain in The Love Bug.
Yeah.
And he plays the father of he plays Mr. Banks in this, and he's one of, I think, the most real Disney characters I've ever seen in anything. You really get the sense of initially it's very much like, oh, he's just a stuck-up British man. He's what Americans think we are all like.
Yep.
But across the film, you kind of get this sort of sense of like he is genuinely having his life challenged by this woman, and he's not sure how to deal with that because he himself has been taught to be very stiff upper lipped and no nonsense and get the job done, and don't sort of blub about it. But the way that he interacts with Julie Andrews is just absolutely beautiful, and at the end conclusion where he's just walking to the bank and has his sort of hearing with the heads of the bank, the board essentially, and just bursts out laughing at all of these jokes that his kids have told across the earlier in the film. I find to be really just an absolutely wonderful, like really just charming, uplifting scene. I love the songs. I love the Jolly Holiday scene where they go into the painting.
Yes.
Dick Van Dyke's accent is horrendous, but he's in his dual role as Bert and Mr. Dawes, the head of the bank. He's wonderful. Ed Wynn as Uncle Albert, who is probably still stuck on the ceiling at a tea party. Can't stop laughing. Glynis Johns as the mother. I think are great. I forget the names of the actors who play the kids, but they've just got so much sort of wonder to them. They're so naive and so sort of wrapped up in this world. And the thing that strikes me most about it is that Mary Poppins is not just the character.
No,
she's not just someone who wants to do things to make kids happy. She's not just, let's have fun and sweets and go to the fun fair all the time, just fun 24/7. She's a genuinely caring person who wants these kids to be the best kids and the best adults in one day that they can be, and to have the best lives that they can have. And there's a maturity, there's a mystery, and there's a firmness to the character, which I really love. I think she's just an excellent motherly figure.
Yes.
Who just I think that stories that are about parents and the relationship between parents and kids are often so hard to do right, because it's hard to find a balance between we'll just have like the fun parent and the grumpy parent. But I think that Mary Poppins really sort of gets that contrast between Mr. Banks and Mary Poppins done basically perfectly.
No, absolutely.
It's absolutely beautiful. Feed the Birds is one of my favorite songs ever, film or not. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then you've got things like Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
That's the song that for me is stuck from my childhood watching this.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the way through, and even now I'll be I'm out on the road driving with my job, and all of a sudden I end up singing it to myself. It's an earworm of a song.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other ones, like I think Chim Chimery is really beautiful,
yes.
just like compositionally speaking. Spoonful of Sugar. I just think it's a wonderful musical. I wasn't a massive fan of Saving Mr. Banks. I thought that it kind of over-sentimentalized the making of the film. I am excited for Mary Poppins Returns.
So that was an upcoming question. That was wondering where you...
Yeah, I like Rob Marshall as a director. Okay. I think that certainly stylistically he's a very good director.
Yeah.
But it's I would not be excited for that film if it wasn't for Emily Blunt.
Yes.
Because I love her so much. Lin-Manuel Miranda is obviously in it as well. And the adults are played by Ben Whishaw and Emily Mortimer, the adults versions of Jane and Michael.
Yeah.
It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I know that Meryl Streep has a small role in it, and I'll watch basically anything with her in it.
She'll probably win an Oscar for it.
Probably. At least be nominated.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily Blunt is the one thing in there. I think if you're going to recast, obviously, which you're going to have to, I don't think you can cast anyone more perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I had a thing.
There, but...
the first few times I was talking about that film with people, I kept saying that it was Emma Thompson, which I think also would have worked very well.
An older version.
Yeah, as sort of a slightly older version, but I think that Blunt is the right choice there. I think that she's got weirdly from seeing stuff like Sicario and Edge of Tomorrow and stuff like that, she's got that firmness to her,
yes.
and also that sort of the gentleness and the kind of and the real acting chops as well. Like first and foremost, she's a brilliant actor.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Julie Andrews in this, in obviously back to probably the first one. She was hesitant to take the role at first. She was waiting and really wanted Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, in the film role of that, and she was putting off actually taking the role. But yeah, again, that's another one now that you can't perfectly cast. You couldn't picture anyone else. It maybe because it's so long and so ingrained in us now. But but from there, okay, that's brilliant. I was going to say another one. Love that film. It's the first time it's been mentioned as well on all of these.
It's excellent. It's so so brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be singing Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious all night again now. Right, we'll flip that on its head. We'll go the other way. What's the film that makes you sad?
Yeah, you say sad. I say just crushes me completely and depresses me. And I didn't want to go with like a tearjerker because I don't tend to respond massively well to things that are just like, oh, it will make you cry.
Yeah.
Bambi's and such.
Wicker Man remake.
Different tears. That is a film that makes me sad. But I went with a film that was kind of trying to make me sad. Very much, I would call it the Requiem for a Dream of relationship movies. Okay. 2010's Blue Valentine, which is directed by Derek Gianfranche and stars Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams, and is about their incredibly troubled relationship. It's presented in non-linear, sort of a non-linear narrative. I think it's over the course of about 5 years. And it's about a sort of a high school dropout and a pre-med student who meet each other and have this relationship where they fall in love, and then one of them finds out that they're pregnant and that it's probably not their new partners, and they stay together through this pregnancy, and Ryan Gosling has an alcohol sort of addiction, and they get a dog, and the dog dies, and it's just like all of these things that the sort of slow burn breakdown of this relationship, where this guy's alcoholism and their communication issues basically are just horrible to watch. It's a film that would it does a pretty good job of steering me away from relationships forever.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly made film, but from start to finish, it's just this sense of like decay and breakdown to the whole thing. I don't think I could ever watch it again, even though it is a film that I was very affected by.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Yeah, it's not one I've seen. I mean, you're there and you're telling me about the cast. It's got a decent cast. I like Ryan Gosling films. But it's not one I've seen. So that's one I'm gonna. I say I won't rush out to try and find it, but it's one I won't shy away from if I do. Hear it coming through.
You're married, aren't you?
I am, yes.
If you're secure enough in your marriage, then watch it.
Yeah, that's no problem there.
Let's say people in less secure budding relationships, it's maybe not for them.
No, absolutely. What was it, 22 years together now? So yeah,
wow.
it's more than secure. Okay, we'll take us out of the funk of being sad. And what's the film you know practically the entire script of?
So it's a weird. That's actually a very strange one because my memory is not fantastic. I'm not the kind of person who tends to remember, like who's able to like quote films start to finish.
Yeah.
Film watching is often a very kind of transient experience for me. Like I'm watching a film and I'm very in the moment of it, and then when it's gone, it will have a kind of emotional effects on me. But I don't tend to like sort of pore over scripts, especially seeing as I'm not a screenwriting specialist in terms of my studies. I'm much more interested in cinematography and setting and music.
Yeah.
But I think that the type of film that is most easy to get stuck in people's heads is comedy films.
Right.
And the one that always does it for me is Young Frankenstein,
Okay.
which is a Mel Brooks film from probably the best year of Mel Brooks' life, 1974, where he made both Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles. I love both films. And Young Frankenstein is a parody of old Universal monster movies, particularly Frankenstein. And that's probably why it's the one that makes with me more. It's got Gene Wilder in it, and what's the name? Madeline Kahn.
This is where I have a massive hole as well. I've not seen this.
Oh, it's so fantastic.
Yeah.
It's got so many quotable lines. I like werewolf. What? Their wolf. Their castle. And stuff like he would have an enormous Schwanstoker. What a filthy job. How could be worse? How could be raining? There's a lot of sort of quotes that I find play around with the style and the structure of monster movies, and there's just a lot of it that I get stuck in my head, just in terms of jokes and the like.
Yeah.
It's a very funny movie, and it tends to get stuck with me.
Yeah, no problem. It's a massive hole in there. I love Mel Brooks films. I mean, it's Robin Hood Men in Tights is my favourite Robin Hood film.
Yeah,
without a shadow of a doubt. But yeah, that one's just passed me by slightly.
Oh, it's really excellent. I watched it around the same time when I first watched Blazing Saddles, and Blazing Saddles. I don't know if it's the case, but it feels like Blazing Saddles might be the film that he made after he made Young Frankenstein, because Young Frankenstein is largely tame and sort of feels slightly more polished, whereas Blazing Saddles very, very meta and very wacky, and ends with like the cowboys breaking through the walls of the studio that they're filming in next door. Whereas Young Frankenstein is much more like cemented in itself as a genre film, and I think it's Gene Wilder's best. Willy Wonka. I think it's one of Gene Wilder's best performances.
Yeah.
Dr. Frederick from not pronounced Frankenstein. But yeah, it's just one of my favorite comedies. One that I love a lot.
Okay. So you've gone a little quiet again there right towards the end, but I think.
Have I?
Yep, there you go. You're back again now. I don't know what. Right, we'll move on then while we've still got you on audio. What's your favourite director?
There are so many.
Yeah.
What a question. The one that I landed on in the end was another director that is a director that is primarily known for horror movies, but one who also has made a lot of non-horror films, especially more recently, and that's David Cronenberg.
Right.
He's a Canadian director, most famous for his body horror films like The Fly and Videodrome, Scanners, and the like. All films I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Shivers, Rabid, The Brood is my favorite film of his. He made what I think is the best adaptation of a Stephen King book besides The Shining, which is the adaptation of The Dead Zone,
yes.
Christopher Walken on Sheen. He made Crash and Naked Lunch and one of my other favorite films, A History of Violence. And what I love about him so much is that he does so much. He sort of started out by doing so much like incredible technical work, particularly in stuff like working with effects people. But his films always remained, and still to this day kind of remain, very sort of about humanity and its flaws and foibles. And it's how to put it, sort of the vulnerability of humanity as a concept. It's about how weak and fragile humanity is. I think that he's made some of the scariest movies of all time. I think that he's directed some of the best performances by actors, from James Woods, is that his name?
Yes.
James Woods. In Jeff Cronenberg and Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, and Viggo Mortensen in A History of Violence. He works usually with actors. He works a lot with Howard Shore, and I love all of Howard Shore's scores for his films. I just think that he is a real golden boy. He's made very, very few bad movies. But the ones that he has made that are sort of so excellent at his peak are more than good enough for me to want to put him on the top.
No, absolutely. He's his first film in '75 with Shivers didn't really hit the mainstream sort of issues until the '80s with Scanners, Videodrome, Dead Zone, and then up until sort of like Crash and History of Violence, his best known work was the '86 remake with Fly.
Yeah.
But I love History of Violence. I didn't realise at first it was a Cronenberg film.
Yeah, it's very understandable for it because we're so used to him doing his body horror stuff.
Yes.
Like that's the way we best know him.
Yeah.
Especially certainly in sort of cultural consciousness. I think that when you see a film like Cosmopolis or History of Violence or Eastern Promises or Map to the Stars,
yes,
it's initially not very easy to peg it as a sort of Cronenberg film, but his films have always kind of, to me, been about human transformation and how scary it is to be a person and how scary other people are, and sort of the differences between perceptions and reality of humans.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's still very present in all of his drama work, or some of it I suppose is dark comedy. But I think that he's got this sort of thematic through line, which I think gives his films a real nice consistency. I think that you could kind of marathon all of his movies and get a real trajectory as an artist.
Yeah. No, fantastic. It's I do love it. I love Scanners. I remember watching Videodrome and wondering what the hell it was I stumbled across. But it's Crash not so much, but History of Violence and Eastern Promises, those two of his I really, really like. Maybe it's the fact that they're not the 80s sloppy body horror ones, but Shivers I've seen real recently and really, really enjoy watching that.
Shivers is intense. It's very, very cheap and doesn't try to hide it. But it's so technically just creative. I'm a fan of Scanners too. I love Michael Ironside in that film. I think he's excellent. He's terrifying as Daryl Revitt, the villain. I really enjoy Naked Lunch as well. But my favourites of his are The Brood, History of Violence, and The Dead Zone.
Yes.
which is, I guess, one very body horror-ish, and then two that are less so.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Right, we'll take you back in time a little bit, though. What's your favourite film from your childhood?
Yeah, so I suppose two-part answer. My favourite film when I was a kid was Aladdin. Okay. But my favourite film now from my childhood, one that I watched a lot as a kid and have kind of continued to watch growing up, and watch occasionally even now, is The Land Before Time.
Okay. Well, I suppose you can still watch them because there's 14 of them. Yeah,
I mean, I do remember watching the series. I would stick to the first now. Yes. Because it's Don Bluth's film, who later, maybe before, but he also made The Secret of Nim and An American Tale. Yeah, I think The Secret of Nim and American Tale are both before. Yeah. And The Secret of Nim is probably his best film from a technical perspective. Yes. It's probably his best story, and just his best technically made film. The Land Before Time is a little bit cheaper. It's a little bit sort of more rough around the edges. It's a little bit more basic, but I, as a child, was absolutely obsessed with dinosaurs, and this was a really nice, very watchable, at times scary story about dinosaurs. And it was a journey story, and I loved the band of characters at the center of it all. I loved it then, and I love it potentially even more today because I've got that association with it.
Sorry, a bit of static there, bit of feedback. You still there? Yep. That's okay. That's cool. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it does kind of mirrors to a certain extent with the journey aspect. The Ice Ages of modern times is obviously the parallels being the dinosaurs and everything else again. It's but yeah, Land Before Time. It's a long time ago since I've seen him. If I must have seen him at some point, but it was a long while ago with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it also is very similar to the 2000 movie Dinosaur.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that Don Bluth's films are always so beautiful and so earthy. They feel, well, I say always, he also made a Troll in Central Park and The Pebble and the Penguin. So not always so great. But his movies at their best are really sort of sweet and sincere, and I think that there's a real care to them. It was obviously released the same year as Oliver and Company. And is, I think, the better of the two Disney films that was released that year, and is not even made by Disney.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Staying in the same kind of genre as it was, what's your favourite animated, or should I say, what's your second favourite animated?
Yeah, my favourite animated film is Princess Mononoke. Let's talk about that again. Yeah. My second favourite animated film and my favourite Pixar movie of all time is, I don't think, a particularly popular pick. For all-time favorite Pixar film is 2008's WALL-E.
I love that film.
Which is directed by Andrew Stanton. It came out I think after Ratatouille, which was made in 2007. Yeah. It was so they'd already sort of built themselves up with the Toy Stories and The Incredibles and that kind of thing. And what I love about WALL-E is, first of all, I kind of have a thing for environmentalist movies. I like films about the environment because I care a lot about the environment. Yep. Because this is all of our house, and I don't really want to lose it to anything. But also, it's mostly about the relationship between these two little rats. Wally and Eve are maybe just two of my favorite characters in all of cinema, and neither of them say anything in particular. No. And just the first half of that film, which is so quiet and basically dialogue free, but so incredibly characterful. It's the voice of Wally, so to speak, is Ben Burt, who was the sound designer for the Star Wars movies. It's probably the movie he's most famous for, designing a lot of the robot sounds, the lightsaber sounds, that kind of thing. And he's essentially the voice of Wally. And Ben Burtt's sound design is always excellent. There's all of his sound designs feel like they have a history to them and a character behind them, even if they are for a laser sword. And he makes this leading character so sweet and so sincere. The cinematography is obviously the wrong word, but the animators on this film had collaborated with Roger Deakins, the obviously very famous cinematographer.
Yeah.
Worked on Skyfall, Coen Brothers movies, Sicario, all that kind of stuff. And obviously most recently Blade Runner 2049, which he finally won his Oscar for. And you can tell from the look of the film that it's inspired a lot by Deakins' work, because it's all very warm, natural, and they've specifically animated their light in a way to mimic the lenses of film cameras, and it looks so real. I think that it's one of my favorite romance movies. I think that it's a really lovely environmental movie. I think that the first half is maybe my favorite 40 minutes in cinema. Overall, I think it's at this point very underrated, and I just absolutely love it.
No, absolutely. It's, as you say, the first half of the film, essentially the first half of the film, when it's just Wall-E on his own, is some of the best non-Buster Keaton you're ever going to find. It's the first time I watched it, I was there, and I was transfixed by it. I did just, what's happening? Where's this going? What's going to happen next? But then the second half of it, just you just swept away with the whole story. I love it. It's it was the first Pixar film to be nominated for 6 Oscars, tying it all time with Beauty and the Beast. It's admittedly it's not my favourite Pixar. That still holds as Toy Story for me, but this is one that I can rewatch and just get the same emotion and same what's happening, and then just swept away with the second half of it every single time.
I think it's in many ways I consider it to be like the culmination of the Toy Story logic, which is kind of like, how human can we make something that is sort of far away from being human?
Yes.
Right? So in Toy Story you have things like Rex and Slinky, and I think for me most notably like stuff like the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yes.
Which are so far from human in how we register their emotions. But they're very real characters. Wall-E is like, okay, how much can we make people feel for like a cube robot with a pair of like, goo goo eyes? And the answer is, I guess, a lot, because it's got one of the dance scene is in space with the fire hydrant, fire extinguisher. Is just one of the scenes that always takes my breath away. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got a trivia for you. What does Wall-E stand for?
Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth Class.
Oh yes, get in. That's a silly question. Sure.
And then Eve is Electronic Vegetation Evaluator, I think.
Yeah. Yep. No, fair enough. Okay. The voice of Eve isn't actually an actress. Alyssa Knight. She was just a member of Pixar staff.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's just hiring an entirely different person to do the Eve voice just seems somewhat silly.
Yeah, just at the end of the day, I think she got 2 lines. Wall-E, Eva.
Yeah.
No, I guess that brilliant film. We'll move away from these. What's your favourite quote from any film?
Yeah, we're talking about Cronenberg again. In The Fly, when Gina Davis confronts Jeff Goldblum when he's somewhat far in his transformation, this is one of those quotes where it really highlights Cronenberg's sort of interest in the frailty of humanity and how we're all very close to becoming monsters. He says, I'm an insect who dreamed he was a man and loved it, but now the dream is over and the insect is awake. And it's just the way he delivers it, and the writing of the quote itself is very pointed, and it's so tragic. It's so incredibly tragic, because we meet Goldblum, and he's kind of a jerk. and he's kind of a smart ass, and we see him, but he wants to do something great. He wants to do, sort of make these massive strides and advance the world, and he finally achieves something, but it results in such a horrible mutation. And at the same time, he's becoming more primitive and more violent, and he doesn't want to hurt this woman that he deeply cares about. But he knows that he's going to, because at this point, all that he sees in himself is an insect, is a monster. And I think that sentence, that bit of speech is just one of the most perfect sort of summations of character and of arc in movies, in screenwriting. And I think it's philosophical, it's descriptive, it sounds great, in terms of like just the way the sentence sounds, the way the word sounds, linguistically speaking.
Yeah.
I just think it works on so many levels.
Okay, fantastic. I can't argue with it. It's what it is. Right. One more of a basic one, then we'll get some fun going through. So, what's your favourite actor? Who's your favourite actor or actress?
Yeah, so I have to cheat on this one, because in the thing that I've sent you, I've said that it's Boris Karloff, and it is Boris Karloff. But I have to also talk about Bela Lugosi, because I was thinking about this a lot, and there were a lot of sort of very classic actors going through my head: Henry Fonda, Katharine Hepburn, Meryl Streep was there for a while. All of these sort of Denzel Washington, Sidney Poitier were among people as well. Cary Grant. But what it came down to for me is, who are the actors, who are the performers that I like watching the most? Who will I smile the most watching on screen? Who do I look forward to seeing on screen the most? And that is Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, both Universal film actors. Joined the studio in the very early 1930s. Bela Lugosi was a Hungarian actor who got his big screen popular. Boris Karloff was Frankenstein, and watching their careers grow together aside each other through films like The Black Cat and The Old Dark House and The Raven, and then stuff like Frankenstein the Wolfman and The House of Frankenstein and such. They're just always so delightful to see on screen. But if I had to choose one, it would be Karloff. Yeah. Because his characters are usually more sensitive, more human, slightly more layered, I think. Mm-hmm. And he's just always such a joy to see.
No, absolutely. I mean, the pair of them, they gave what is, I think it's safe to say, the standard point of visuals for the characters that are best known for, the Frankenstein's monster and Dracula.
Yes, absolutely. The most iconic image.
Absolutely, and the ones where, I mean, if you ask as a child to draw a picture of Dracula, they would give you the widow's peak at the front and the swept back hair, and again for Frankenstein it would be a picture of a cartoonized version of Karloff.
Very, very square head with the stitches and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Karloff in the first Frankenstein film, Karloff doesn't speak, and he gets across so much without any words. He speaks in the second and third movies, but even like in terms of in other films, like one of my favorite films that has both Karloff and Lugosi in it is called The Black Cat, and it's not an adaptation of the Poe story, although it's titled for it. And they play these sort of vicious enemies, one of whom who were in the war together, and one of whom betrayed his troops. That's Boris Karloff's character, who's called Polzig, and Bela Lugosi plays Vertigast.
Yeah.
And just watching them bounce off each other, they're so they have such a knack for countering the other's acting style, which makes sense because they were pretty consistently trying to upstage each other because they hated each other.
Yeah.
certainly at the point where they were working together the most, they were not fans of each other because Boris Karloff, being an American, got top billing in all of the movies, and Bela Lugosi was just this kind of foreigner who was a curiosity. But whether they're on stage or whether they're on screen together or apart, I love watching them both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's him. So Lugosi, Karloff, Lon Chaney, Vincent Price. They were at the time, and over there, they were the kings of horror cinema at the time. That untouchable and to a certain extent still are up there as the actors that made this genre what it is.
Yeah, certainly. I think in terms of iconic faces, iconic voices, so much of horror is in what we sort of is in what we hear, right? Like it's in sound.
Yes. And
the voices of Bela Lugosi and the sort of the moans and sort of groans of Boris Karloff are so ingrained in horror culture. I mean, Lugosi was buried in the Dracula cave.
Yeah.
So if that doesn't say anything, that I don't know what will.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Okay, we've come to this question. The one that always causes a little bit of fun with. What's your most overrated film?
Yeah, so people will know that I'm not a they'll know that I'm not a Quentin Tarantino fan. And if this is not my least favorite Quentin Tarantino film, but if there is a Quentin Tarantino film that I think is the most overrated, it's Pulp Fiction.
Whoa, hold on a minute. Right, this is the part where I wish I had a button that would have a massive klaxon saying it's Oscar winner for the best screenplay. Nomination for best picture, leading actor, supporting actress, director and editing. $8 million budget, $214 million gross worldwide. Relaunches the career of John Travolta, cements the career of Samuel L. Jackson and Tarantino, and is IMDb's number 8 of all time. Yeah. A lot of people. You're overrated.
A lot of people like the movie. It's very, very highly rated, and I don't like it very much.
Tell me why it's overrated.
So here's the thing. Tarantino's films, I honestly believe that Tarantino's films have gotten better with time. He's gotten more efficient with his writing. He's gotten more precise with his writing. He has much less on his movies now. I don't think that he's a particularly interesting crime writer because I don't think that the sort of the crimes and the sort of the methodology of it is ever really particularly interesting. I don't think that relaunching the career of John Travolta is something that we particularly wanted. We've all seen Face Off, which is great, but like, come on. And that it was in the remake of The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Is that the one that he's in the remake
he
of?
Was in that, yeah.
Like, I'm not entirely sure that that's necessarily great. I think Samuel L. Jackson and Tarantino have gone on to do better work since. I think that Tarantino is a director and a writer who has real trouble writing characters that don't talk like him. I think that every character in that film basically in some way talks like Quentin Tarantino, and I find that to be obnoxious. I don't like the way that the vignette storytelling is done. It's really drawing attention to itself in a way that I find to be kind of obnoxious. I think that the ultimate culmination at the end, back in the restaurant, is really heavy-handed and overdone. I think that basically everyone involved has done better, except for maybe Amanda Plummer. And I just find it boring, to be honest. I think that there's a lot about Tarantino's style that is to be admired. I think that he is a director who has a real knack for writing scenes that are edited, that are sort of lend themselves up for really interesting editing. I tend to like his shots, and I tend to like his mixing of various bits of cultural, sort of various bits of different cultures and putting them into his films. Done maybe not so fantastically with Kill Bill, but much better in Django Unchained and Inglourious Bastards. I think that he's a figure who is very he's almost a little too reverent towards particular genres and particular styles. He reminds me a lot of Eli Roth's Green Inferno,
right?
Where it's just like you're literally just making a film for people who is. It feels like most of Tarantino's films are mentally made for people who have watched as many movies as Tarantino has, and I think that makes them quite. It should, for all intents and purposes, make them quite inaccessible, because not everyone has the same kind of deep-seated interest in certain genres that he has, and also I just find him obnoxious, and I don't want him to occupy my screen.
Okay. Well, there's a statement to end that bit on. Okay, I agree. I'm not going to disagree with you on any of it. Apart from one where he says it got better from there, because I prefer Reservoir Dogs over probably 90% of his films.
I also do really like Reservoir Dogs, but I think that the Reservoir Dogs benefits from... I feel like there were more people holding Quentin back on Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah,
if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, quite.
And it's a shorter movie. So I do like Reservoir Dogs a lot. But
it is a leaner film. The storyline is very, very much it's point A to point B. Let's go. Let's get there.
Yeah.
But, no. Okay, no, fair enough. It's this is the beauty of that question on there. It's the one that always creates a little bit of conversation around it all. But
absolutely,
brilliant. Okay, we'll flip on its head. We'll go the opposite way. What's your most underrated film?
Yeah, so this is quite interesting because I don't like a lot of bad movies. Okay. But one that kind of kept coming up as sort of generally having sort of a lot of low ratings, was very controversial when it came out, was absolutely slated by Christian groups, parenting groups, considered to be in flagrant defiance of common decency, and is now looked at very much in terms of like, oh, it's a kind of a historically important film, but it's not very well made, it's pretty clunky. And I think that to some extent those things are true, but I think that the things that Wes Craven's 1972 Last House on the Left has to say about violence on screen and violence in popular culture and how it's sort of feeding into a very cyclical sort of passion of violence in nations, in social, are so kind of interesting and enlightening that I think that it gets past how kind of clunky and cheap the film is. It's a film that Craven made largely after being bombarded with Vietnam footage for 10 years. Mm-hmm. On TV screens. It's a film that comes out of people who were very much involved in peace movements in the 1960s, and it was kind of a question of like, well, how do you make an anti-violent film without showing the horrible realities of violence?
Yeah.
Without showing how awful it can be and how just like despicable and hard to watch it can be. I don't think that Last House on the Left is like an undervalued film in sort of in terms of like film, the growth of film as an art form. It's certainly seen as being very important in like the slasher genre and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's a film that I find is often cast aside as being like, oh, it's it's important culturally and historically speaking, but like it's just a really clunky, poorly made horror film, and I think it's so much more than that.
Yeah, no worries. Was this one of the leading ones in the UK of the video nasties? Was it this?
This was on the nasties.
Yeah.
But I think that the big ones for the video nasties were things like Driller Killer, which it's that film is today is very tame. Obviously, you have the big ones like Cannibal Holocaust and a lot of Lucio Fulci movies. But I think this was banned in Britain for a very, very long time. And certainly was very much.
I think I'm thinking of I Spit on Your Grave as
I Spit on Your Grave also very much so. Yeah, that is kind of the other side of the coin for The Last House on the Left, where it's like, okay, that is the really sleazy, like very little artistic value in that film. I think.
Yeah. And another one that got remade. This one.
Yes.
And another one that I've not seen the remake of. I've seen the original a long, long time ago, and I can't remember a great deal about it other than the storyline. But
Would not recommend The Last House on the Left.
Okay.
Wes Craven is like billed as a producer on it, which I find kind of funny.
Oh right. Okay.
Which sort of shows you all of the things that he was willing to put his name on in the late 2000s. Sorry, Wes, we miss you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Right, we'll move on then. Name a film that you like that no one would expect.
I think that this one was really difficult because I was like, what do people think of me?
Yeah.
What do people expect from me? And I think that the key thing that I could come up with that I don't think expect from me is that I think people just assume that I don't like fun movies. That I'm like wrapped up in like really either very difficult to watch films or like kind of serious and sort of very interested in being art films. But I really love The Mask, which like really love The Mask in a like I have a slight obsession with this film type way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's entirely what people would expect from me. I think that people would assume I feel like I don't come across as a Jim Carrey fan to people, but I really am.
I think, to be honest, going through your questions, your answers previously on here, I don't think I would have ever pulled up The Mask as being one.
No. But it is I love the comic, right? Like it's the comic book that it's based on. I love it's super wacky and violent and out there. And The Mask is certainly a lot tamer than it's the comic book it's adapted from. But I absolutely think that I think that it's Jim Carrey's best comedic role, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most that he's doing in terms of like his sort of peculiarities and physicality, voice and the like. I love the concept of The Mask itself, like this thing that makes you like sort of very suave and go-getting and but is kind of a corrupting force. Obviously it has a sequel that we don't talk about.
Is it first on-screen mention of Loki?
Yeah, yes, I suppose so. But I just find it to be a very funny, very enjoyable film. It's I wouldn't put it in like my top 10 or 20 of all time.
No.
But I absolutely love sort of the visual creativity of it. I love Jim Carrey in it. I think that Charles Russell is generally a kind of an interesting director visually speaking. He's he weirdly enough made the third Nightmare on Elm Street film.
Oh, wow.
And then went on to make The Mask. He did the remake of The Blob, which I mean, maybe the kind of the kinship with sort of practical effects horror movies is what we like about it. Again, cannot deal with that Jamie Kennedy sequel. No, thank you. But the first one is okay in my book.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and an absolutely stunning Cameron Diaz.
Yes. Absolutely.
Her starring role in 19 was she was in this?
She would have been it was 94, so she'd been 22.
Right. But yeah, an absolutely stunning. The introduction to her in the club there is it's. I mean, I'm picturing it now.
It's a really great debut.
Yes,
I like Cameron Diaz a lot actually, and like in general, I think she's great in like Shrek and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can say it's definitely one where the sequels are diminishing returns.
Yeah, that Son of the Mask and with the dog and the Jamie Kennedy and
yeah. We'll
I love Jamie Kennedy because like Scream is so great, but have a tough time with that.
Not good. Was it? Who played Loki in that?
Oh,
Alan Cumming.
It's Alan Cumming, yeah.
It is, isn't it? Oh my lord. Yeah. Okay, let's get rid of the stench of Sunlight and go to what's your favourite classic film?
So I suppose I took classic as being like sort of pre-1970s. That's kind of the definition that I take with it. Because I don't think that like on a quality level it makes sense. I've gone with Errol Reed's movie The Third Man.
Yes.
Which is from 1949, stars one of the greatest men in all of cinema, Orson Welles, and Cotton, who was obviously a great friend of Orson Welles, was also in Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
And I almost chose Citizen Kane, but I wanted to, I think, not say the same thing that I think a lot of people would say.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about a slightly less discussed film, which is it's a great film noir set in Vienna after World War II. World War One? One of the World Wars.
I think it's World War II.
World War II, yeah. And Joseph Cotten plays an American writer who goes to Vienna on the request of his friend, who he then finds out is dead and has been hit by a car. And slowly sort of unravels the story of what happened to his friend, Harry Lime. And it gets sort of tied up in this smuggling ring, and this woman who's living illegally in Vienna with illegal slaves, and tries to sort of get to the bottom of her story, while also sort of unraveling what happened, sort of trying to dig up what the story of what happened to his friends, because it all seems very wrong and off to him.
Yeah.
And I think that it's visually speaking, it's an absolutely gorgeous film. Cinematography is by Robert Krasker, and the music is by Anton Karas, and the combination of the visuals and the sound are really, really excellent. It's all zither music, which is a sort of an old stringed instrument, like a German string instrument. And it just sort of gives everything this very sort of off-kilter, strange vibe to it. I think Cotton and Wells are incredible in it together. I think that the use of the Dutch angles, the harsh lighting, the very defined shadows, and the mystery itself is sort of thrilling and something you really want to get to the bottom of. I think it's excellent.
Yeah. No, I think it's quite hard to say nowadays. It's one that you'd find a UK term here, a Sunday afternoon movie.
Yeah.
Where you've come back down, you left it after having your Sunday lunch, you sit down on the sofa, sorry, Americans, couch, put on the TV.
Don't apologise.
Yeah, and on BBC Two, I'm going to be sharing on BBC Two, you've got a black and white film. Oh look, it's a third man. We'll watch this, and you just sit and watch it, and you'd be taken away with it all. One thing that always makes me laugh about Orson Welles is the voice in '86's Transformers the movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he ends up in a lot of weird things. He's in the Muppet movie.
Yeah.
And he's in the parody version of Casino Royale. He plays Le Chiffre in that film.
Version of Casino
the original,
Royale.
yeah, the original 1960s parody. He plays Le Chiffre. And he refused to be involved with the movie unless they allowed him a section to show off his magic, which is so Orson Welles.
Yeah.
And he's great. He's fantastic in the film. There's a real sort of boyish charm to him, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we'll move on to penultimate questions. What's your film with the best soundtrack?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of this depends on like personal musical taste and such, because we're doing soundtrack rather than score.
Yep.
And I'm actually going to go with the soundtrack for a film that I haven't seen. I've seen the soundtrack a lot more than I've seen the film.
Yeah.
It's a Jamaican crime film from 1972 called The Harder They Come, and it's a film about a poor Jamaican man who joins a Jamaican street gang, and is also kind of a budding musician. Is my understanding. I haven't seen it in a very long time, but that's not what anyone cares about with the movie. The thing that people care about is the soundtrack, which is a sort of a who's who of 1970s rocksteady reggae greats. People like Jimmy Cliff, Toots and the Maytals, the Slickers, Desmond Decker. Jimmy Cliff is the main star of the film and also performs a lot of the music, including the title track, "The Harder They Come," which is one of the most famous ska reggae tracks of all time. And it's also got stuff like "Rivers of Babylon," like all of these sort of old old songs being reinterpreted.
Yeah.
You can get it if you really want. Is also another song that's featured quite heavily in the film, and it's was released by Island Records in the 1970s, and Island Records is a company known for a lot of sort of reggae and ska releases, and it was basically it certainly feels like the soundtrack basically exists. The film basically exists to promote the soundtrack. It's very much a film about the music and about the sound, and it's about a musician. and just based on the quality of music in and of itself, I think that it's got to be up there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a fan of reggae. So yeah, it's one I'm actually I'd have a prick around, because say Jimmy Cliff, I really do like most of his music is coming up there.
You can essentially pass on the movie.
Yeah.
Like the film, I've seen the film once, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But the sounds is what really sort of sticks out. I honestly think it's one of the best albums of the 70s. And maybe I should have chosen something that was a little bit, the soundtrack was a little bit more like intertwined in with the film, like something like maybe Train, which is very much uses its soundtrack to create the world. But I just wanted to sort of highlight some like really incredible music.
No, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. No problem at all. Okay, we've made it to the end. Question number 20. What's your favourite film franchise?
Yeah, I was thinking about like what entirely constituted a franchise, because I was like, well, I'm a big Star Wars fan, big Harry Potter fan, but there's not a franchise that I love in as complete a way, and a franchise that I keep going back to time and time again, as much as the Universal monsters. Okay. Which is sort of, I've been bringing them up throughout. Carlos and Lugosi are my favorite actors. It's specifically, I think the classic Universal monsters up until the 50s.
Right.
Is where I'm really talking about. Sort of starting with the silent films, with the Phantom of the Opera, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Cat and the Canary, Man Who Laughs, going into the golden age in the 1930s with Dracula, and then Frankenstein, and then The Mummy after, The Invisible Man, The Black Cat, and then back to Frankenstein with Bride of Frankenstein. And it's all of their films are so instrumental in sort of my own development as a horror, because of how gothic and dark and beautiful they all are, and they were the films that got me into classic cinema, like sort of even older than like sort of 1940s, like 90s, 1920s silent cinema.
Yeah.
And there's something about all of them, even at their weakest and campest, there's just something to love in all of them, whether it's a kind of a funny aspect like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is just one of my favorite films ever. Yeah. Despite being like a weird comedy crossover cash-in movie, or if it's like a genuinely like emotional and heartbreaking story, like something like Mummy or Son of Frankenstein. Yeah. I just think that there's something to love in so many of those movies. My favorite is probably either Son of Frankenstein or The Invisible Man. Mm-hmm. The Invisible Man is Claude Rains, who ends up playing the father of Lon Chaney's Wolfman in the 1940s. Plays a scientist who turns himself invisible and realizes that he can basically do whatever he wants. Goes slightly mad. I think that obviously it's a huge franchise with tons of movies. Yes. Because they were being made so quickly and so cheap because they were making so much money. So there's a lot of crap in there, and a lot of stuff that barely sort of registers anymore. Yeah. But just the creativity, the practicality, the beauty, the makeup, the sets, the lighting. I just absolutely love all of it. It feels magical in a way that like the early animated Disney films do. They're all beautiful movies. I think even the worst of them. Yeah.
No, it's funny enough. I'm just looking through. I did a Google search for Universal Monsters films. It's including Van Helsing in this.
Yeah, so it does include Van Helsing and like the Mummy and the Scorpion King and stuff like that. If you
Dracula
don't like cut it off after a certain point, but I choose to cut it off at The Leech Woman, which is from 1960, so a very bad movie. Yeah. But everything from sort of the 1920s to the late 50s, I just have a real soft spot for it.
Yeah, no, I really like the original Frankenstein, the original Draculas.
Yeah.
They hold up as long as you watch them for what they are.
Yes, absolutely.
And not expecting great, massive, holding up to date effects or anything like that. So
some like the original Star Wars trilogy.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. We're not opening that can of worms now. No.
I think that it's interesting as a British film fan. Obviously, the Universal monster movies are made in America, but we almost have like a relationship with them that's become more close because of the Hammer films.
Yes.
Because they'd always be, sort of closely associated with the Hammer films. The Hammer films are basically remakes, and they were what brought a lot of people from a sort of slightly later generation, the 60s and 70s, into this world.
Yeah, it's really, really good, really, really good films. And we are done.
And we are
done.
A lot of questions.
Absolutely. Thank you once again to this week's guest, Luca. Just to remind everybody, we are on iTunes, Podbean and YouTube, so please download the episodes, follow the feed, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Luca, have you got anything you'd like to plug or push, or anyone shows for people to come and see or anything like that?
Gosh, no particular plugs. If you're in Canterbury in February of next year, maybe come see Rent. If that ends up happening. Besides that, I am obviously a regular on Full Metal Media and Worldwide Movie Games on YouTube and Facebook, and I am also on Jukebox Trivia, which is a movie trivia show. Besides that, nothing else. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, no problem. If you fancy being on the hot sheet yourself, then you can email us on thatmadeyourlist@outlook.com. We're on Twitter at thatmadeyour. We've also got our own Facebook page, That Made Your List, where you can find all the old episodes as well as a pinned post of the questions that get asked. Please get involved, comment on the posts, tell me if you think I've been harsh or if you think someone makes a poor choice. Please don't be rude, be very polite on these. I've been Dave Goodger, he's been Luca Hope-Fallon, and this has been That Made Your List.